The sun dipped low in the sky as Lara and Mark Mitchell finally arrived at their destination, a remote camping spot nestled deep within the vast wilderness of southern Utah. The city had been suffocating them both, and they longed for an escape into nature, away from the noise and chaos of their everyday lives. "Look at this place, Lara," Mark breathed, an awestruck expression adorning his face as he took in their surroundings. "It's like we've stepped into another world." Lara nodded in agreement, her hazel eyes sparkling with excitement. Her shoulder-length auburn hair whipped around her face as a gentle breeze picked up. She sighed contentedly and replied, "It's absolutely perfect." The rugged terrain was awe-inspiring, with colossal red rock formations towering over the landscape, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Cacti dotted the sandy ground, and gnarled juniper trees twisted their way towards the sky. In the midst of this arid beauty lay a serene lake, its crystal-clear waters reflecting the vastness of the azure heavens above. "Let's set up camp over there by the shore," suggested Mark, pointing towards a flat area near the water's edge. "Great idea," Lara smiled, her introverted nature embracing the solitude and quiet that this secluded site promised. "I can't wait to explore this place once we're settled in." As they unpacked their gear and began assembling their tent, the couple found themselves invigorated by the peacefulness of the wilderness. The only sounds were the rustling leaves of the juniper trees and the gentle lapping of the lake's water against the shore. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the polluted environment they'd left behind in the city. "We needed this, didn't we?" Lara asked, glancing over at Mark as he drove a tent stake into the ground. "Definitely," he grunted, his muscular arms straining with the effort. "We've both been so stressed lately. This is our chance to recharge and reconnect with each other." Lara's heart swelled with affection for her husband as she watched him work. She knew that Mark's extroverted nature meant he often craved excitement and adventure, but she appreciated how he was also able to recognize when they needed a break from the hustle and bustle of their busy lives. "Almost done here," Mark announced, snapping Lara from her thoughts. "Then we can relax and take in this incredible place." With a final stretch of canvas, their tent was complete, and the couple stood back to admire their handiwork. The sun had now disappeared behind the towering rock formations, leaving the sky awash with hues of pink and gold. The air began to cool, and the first stars of the evening started to twinkle into existence, signaling the end of another day and the beginning of their much-needed escape into the wild. With their campsite finally ready, Lara and Mark sat by the crackling fire, its warmth warding off the chill of the night. They sipped on hot cocoa, the steam rising from the mugs as they listened to the gentle sounds of the lake's water lapping at the shore. "Isn't this amazing?" Lara remarked, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "It's like we're miles away from civilization." "Exactly what we needed," Mark replied, his gaze never leaving the fire. Lara leaned back, taking in the vast expanse of stars overhead. She couldn't remember the last time they'd seen a sky so clear. A sudden memory sparked within her. "Hey, didn't you mention something about local legends when we first arrived?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Yeah," Mark said, pausing for a moment before continuing. "Some folks in town were talking about skinwalkers. It's just superstition, though." "Skinwalkers?" Lara echoed, intrigued. "What are those?" Mark shrugged. "I don't know all the details, but they're supposed to be these shape-shifting creatures that roam the area. They say they can take on human or animal forms, and they've been part of the local lore for centuries." "Wow," Lara breathed out, her imagination running wild with images of shadowy figures stalking through the wilderness. "That's fascinating. What else did you hear?" "Something about them being linked to ancient shamanic practices. But honestly, babe, it's all just stories people tell to scare each other around the campfire," Mark reassured her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Maybe," Lara conceded, her thoughts still consumed by the idea of mysterious beings lurking in the dark. "But it does make for an interesting tale while we're out here, doesn't it?" Mark chuckled, his skepticism evident. "Sure, as long as we don't start hearing strange noises in the night." As they continued their discussion of local lore and legends, the wilderness around them seemed to grow darker and more mysterious, adding to the allure and intrigue of the stories shared between them. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the rugged wilderness. Lara and Mark sat side by side on a fallen log near their campsite, the stillness of the lake reflecting the final rays of sunlight. The sound of their crackling campfire filled the air as they continued discussing the local legends. "Mark," Lara began, her voice tinged with curiosity. "What do people around here say about the Skinwalkers? I mean, do they really believe in them?" Mark raised his eyebrows, his skepticism evident in his tone. "I think it varies from person to person. Some folks seem pretty convinced, while others dismiss it as nothing more than myth." "Interesting," Lara mused, her hazel eyes gleaming with fascination. "What's the most common story you've heard?" "Let's see." Mark scratched his beard, thinking. "Well, they say that Skinwalkers were once powerful shamans who turned to dark magic. They can change into any animal at will, but their favorite forms are coyotes, wolves, and bears." "Wow," Lara whispered, her imagination painting vivid images in her mind. "And they live around here?" "Supposedly," Mark replied, unconvinced. "Some claim to have seen them lurking in the shadows, their red eyes glowing like embers." Lara shuddered at the thought, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her jacket. "That's creepy." "It is," Mark agreed, "but there's no concrete evidence to back up these stories. It's all just hearsay and speculation." "True," Lara conceded, her curiosity making her want to dig deeper regardless. "But don't you think there might be some truth behind the legends? People wouldn't keep telling them if there wasn't something to it." "Maybe," Mark responded, his protectiveness kicking in, "but I don't want you getting too wrapped up in these tales. We came out here to relax, remember?" "Of course," Lara assured him, offering a warm smile. But as the darkness of night continued to envelop their surroundings, her thoughts remained on the mysterious creatures that might be lurking just beyond the edge of their campfire's light. Lara stared into the campfire, its flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. She couldn't shake the vivid images her imagination had conjured up about the Skinwalkers. Her curiosity piqued, she turned towards Mark. "Hey, do you think we could ask the locals more about these legends?" Lara asked, her hazel eyes glinting with excitement. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "Lara, I don't want us getting too involved in this. There's no reason to go looking for trouble." "Who said anything about trouble?" Lara countered, shifting her body weight as she leaned forward. "I just want to learn more about the culture and history of this place. Don't you find it fascinating?" "Sure, but—" Mark hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I worry that your fascination might put us in danger. There's probably a reason people are afraid of these stories." "Maybe they're just misunderstood," Lara mused, her eyes fixed on the fire again. "Or maybe there's something even more incredible behind them." "Lara, please," Mark pleaded, concern lacing his voice. "Let's just focus on enjoying our time together here and not get caught up in spooky stories." She sensed his unease and decided not to push further, for now. "Okay, you're right. Let's just enjoy this beautiful place." Despite her agreement, Lara's thoughts continued to drift towards the Skinwalkers. The night seemed darker, the distant howls of coyotes more sinister than before. As much as she wanted to respect Mark's concerns, she couldn't deny the magnetic pull the legends had on her. And so, while Mark slept soundly beside her, Lara lay awake in their tent, listening to the sounds of the wilderness and wondering what mysteries were concealed within its depths. The following morning, Lara stepped out of the tent into the crisp air, her breath visible as she stretched and yawned. Mark rubbed his eyes and joined her, the smell of fresh pine needles and dewy grass enveloping them. "Morning," he mumbled, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her close. She leaned into him, relishing the warmth of his body. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice soft and concerned. "Like a log," he replied, forcing a smile. But the tension in his jaw betrayed him, revealing that he was still worried about their conversation last night. His blue eyes darted around the campsite, scanning for any signs of danger. "Let's get breakfast started, shall we?" Lara suggested, trying to lighten the mood. She moved to the cooler, selecting ingredients for a hearty meal while Mark busied himself with reigniting the fire. As they worked, Lara couldn't help but steal glances at the surrounding wilderness, her mind wandering back to the legends of Skinwalkers. She noticed the way the shadows seemed to dance between the trees, the eerie silence that settled over the lake, and the strange rustling sounds that echoed through the forest. "Hey," Mark said, snapping her out of her reverie. "You're doing it again." "Sorry," she murmured, biting her lip. She could see the lines of worry etched across his forehead, and she knew she needed to put his fears to rest. "I promise I'll try to keep my mind off the stories." "Good. I just want us both to relax and enjoy this trip," he said, reaching over to give her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Me too," she agreed, offering a genuine smile. But deep down, Lara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the legends than mere superstition. Though she hid her thoughts from Mark, the pull of intrigue continued to tug at her mind. Later on that evening, Mark pushed a log further into the fire, sending a shower of sparks up into the twilight sky. The air was rich with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the lake's surface shimmered like glass in the fading light. "Hey, Lara, come look at this," Mark called out, pointing toward the lake. In her curiosity, she momentarily set aside thoughts of skinwalkers and joined him at the water's edge. "Wow, it's beautiful," she murmured, watching the sun dip below the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with hues of orange, pink, and purple. "I almost forgot why we came here." "Me too," Mark admitted, slipping his arm around her waist. "We both needed this break from the city. Just promise me you won't let your imagination run wild, okay?" "Promise," she said, though the lingering unease remained tucked away in the back of her mind. "Good." He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, then nodded toward their campsite. "Let's go finish making dinner before it gets too dark." As they made their way back, Lara couldn't help but feel a shiver of apprehension run down her spine. The shadows lengthened and twisted, taking on eerie, distorted shapes that seemed to watch them from the darkness. She shook off the sensation, reminding herself that it was only her imagination getting the better of her. "Did you hear that?" Mark suddenly asked, his voice tense and alert. Lara strained her ears, picking up on a strange, distant howling that seemed to reverberate through the trees. "Probably just some coyotes or something," she suggested, trying to sound casual despite the pounding of her heart. "Nothing to worry about." "Right," Mark agreed, though she could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. They finished their meal in silence, the sounds of the wilderness pressing in around them, heavy and oppressive. "Let's turn in for the night," Mark suggested, his voice tight. Lara nodded, following him into their tent, trying not to think about the legends that haunted her thoughts. As they settled down to sleep, the uncertainty continued to gnaw at the edges of Lara's mind, leaving her with a growing sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking out there in the darkness, watching, waiting, and she knew that sleep would not come easily tonight. The sound of rustling leaves woke Lara from her restless slumber. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, trying to get the sleep out. Mark was still fast asleep beside her, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Curious, she crawled out of the tent, her bare feet sinking into the cool dirt beneath her. The moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie silver light over the campsite. Lara's eyes scanned the surrounding forest, searching for the source of the noise. That's when she saw it. A dark figure darting through the trees in the distance, its form shrouded in shadows. Lara's heart leapt into her throat. Was it a skinwalker? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She debated waking Mark but decided against it. He wouldn't believe her, and it was probably just an animal anyway. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that twisted within her gut as she crawled back into the tent and settled into her sleeping bag. Her mind raced with thoughts of the legends of skinwalkers and the possibility that they might be true. She tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the sound of Mark's soft breathing beside her. But then, there was another rustling sound, closer this time. Lara's heart raced as she held her breath, listening intently. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she strained to hear more. Suddenly there was a low growl, so close that it sounded like it came from right outside the tent. Lara's blood ran cold as the realization hit her. There was something out there, and it was not friendly. She shook Mark awake, terror coursing through her veins. "Mark, wake up, something's out there." He jolted awake, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. What's going on?" Lara's eyes darted towards the entrance of the tent, her body trembling with apprehension. "I heard something outside, and then I heard a growl," she whispered urgently. Mark sat up, his muscles tense as he listened for any sounds from outside. In the silence, they could both hear the thudding of their hearts. I'll go check it out, Mark said, his voice low and determined. Are you crazy? Lara hissed, grabbing his arm. You can't go out there, it's too dangerous. I have to see what it is. If it's an animal, I'll scare it off, Mark said, gently pulling away from her grasp. Just stay here and keep the flashlight on. If anything happens, yell for me. Lara nodded hesitantly as Mark grabbed a flashlight and crawled out of the tent. She could hear his footsteps crunching on the ground outside as he made his way towards the source of the noise. Her heart raced as she waited, the tension mounting with each passing second. Suddenly, there was a blood-curdling scream, and Lara's breath caught in her throat. She scrambled out of the tent, the flashlight clutched tightly in her hand as she ran towards the sound. Mark, she called out, her voice trembling with fear. Mark, where are you? There was no answer, only the sound of her own panicked breathing and the rustling of leaves. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as she approached a clearing in the trees. And then, she saw it. A dark figure standing in the center of the clearing, its form obscured by shadows. Her heart racing, Lara aimed the flashlight at the figure, the beam revealing a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. It was a Skinwalker. Lara stumbled backward, her mind racing with terror. The legends were true, and this thing was going to kill her. She turned to run, but the creature was too fast. In a blur of motion, it was upon her, its claws digging into her flesh as it pinned her to the ground. Lara screamed as she fought against the creature's strength, but it was no use. The Skinwalker was too powerful, too relentless. It bared its teeth, its hot breath washing over her face as it prepared to strike. But then there was a loud crack, and the Skinwalker recoiled in pain. Mark stood over them holding a large branch that he had used to hit the creature. Get up, Lara, we need to go, he yelled, reaching out a hand to help her up. Lara scrambled to her feet, her heart racing as they sprinted towards their car. The Skinwalker pursued them, its howls echoing through the night air as they ran. Finally, they reached the car and jumped inside, slamming the door shut as the creature pounded on the metal exterior. Lara's hands shook as she fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine. Hurry, Mark yelled, glancing back at the creature. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, its form shifting and changing as it tried to find a way into the car. Lara finally managed to turn the key in the ignition, and the car came to life with a roar. She slammed her foot on the gas pedal and they sped off into the night, leaving the Skinwalker far behind. They drove in silence for a few miles, both lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they reached the safety of a small town that they finally spoke. What was that thing? Lara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Mark admitted, his eyes focused on the road ahead. But I don't think it's something we want to see ever again. Lara nodded, her mind still reeling from the experience. They drove on in silence, both of them lost in thought. The encounter with the Skinwalker had left them both shaken, and it was something that they would never forget. As they drove, they passed by a small gas station on the side of the road. Mark pulled over, and they both got out of the car to stretch their legs and get some fresh air. I think we need to report what happened, Lara said, her voice still shaking. To the authorities. Mark nodded in agreement. You're right. We can't just let this go. Who knows how many other people have had similar encounters with these creatures. They walked over to the gas station, hoping to find someone who could help them. As they approached, they noticed that there were no cars parked outside of the gas station, and the lights were off. The only sound came from the rustling of leaves in the wind. Suddenly, they heard a faint whisper, a voice coming from the darkness behind the gas station. It was too quiet to make out what the voice was saying, but it sent shivers down both of their spines. Mark instinctively reached for his pocket knife, ready to defend himself and Lara if necessary. They slowly made their way towards the back of the gas station, their eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. As they rounded the corner of the building, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A person, dressed in what looked like an animal pelt, illuminating his twisted expressions and contorting face which looked like a mix between a man and a coyote. Lara and Mark froze, unsure of what to do. They had stumbled upon something dark and sinister, something that they weren't meant to see. Mark immediately grabbed Lara and ran back to the car, his heart racing with fear. As they drove away, they could see the figure in the rearview mirror, its eyes glowing in the darkness. "What the hell was that?" Lara exclaimed, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark said, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "But I think we need to get out of here and report this to the police." They drove for hours, stopping only to get gas and grab a quick bite to eat. Both encounters with the Skinwalker left them both exhausted and on edge. As they got closer to civilization, they began to relax, the fear slowly dissipating. When they finally arrived home, they sat down and wrote out a detailed report of both their encounters with the Skinwalker. They submitted the report to the authorities, hoping that it would help others who might encounter similar situations in the future. Days turned into weeks, and they heard nothing back. A year has passed since the encounter with the creature, and they both thought that they would never hear about it again. But one night, as they were watching the news, they saw a report about several people who had gone missing in the nearby area where they had camped. Mark and Lara looked at each other, their hearts sinking as they realized that the Skinwalker was still out there, lurking in the darkness and preying on its unsuspecting victims.